Hey folks, how's it going? Dr. Spin, eclectic glam reviews and general musical meanderings. You're catching up with me in the middle of a long-term study that I'm doing on the Van Halen catalog, specifically the time when David Lee Roth was the lead singer of the group. And this was brought on, of course, by the unfortunate passing of Eddie Van Halen towards the end of 2020. But it's given me an opportunity to go back and maybe revisit some albums that I love, but also maybe look at some albums that I haven't looked at quite as closely, because the way that I added Van Halen to my catalog over the course of the last 30 years has been piecemeal here and there. So this being the third installment, we're looking at Women and Children First. Now, if you want to talk albums that were introduced to my collection piecemeal, this is a great example of it, because this is the last Van Halen album that I added to my catalog, and I only got it in 2018. If we're talking about Van Halen, and this series is predicated on Edward Van Halen's passing, I have to talk about him. And of course, because I've also defined this by David Lee Roth being the lead singer of the group, I've had to talk about him. And also in the first two albums, Michael Anthony played a very big role in the sound, forming the sound of Van Halen. So I've talked about him. But the person I haven't really talked about at all was Alex Van Halen. And I want to take this opportunity on this post to catch that, because Alex, of course, is a key member of Van Halen. He is one of the two people that has the name Van Halen in the group, so that's part of it. And also, because he is, I think of the four people in the band, it's safe to say, at least the four people in the band at this time, he's probably the most reserved of the bunch. And that doesn't mean a whole lot. I mean, maybe if you're a little bit more introverted than David Lee Roth or Eddie Van Halen, it doesn't mean that you're necessarily like a hermit, but you're just not like an exhibitionist, Alex Van Halen's drumming is as important to the sound of Van Halen as Eddie's guitar playing is, or Michael Anthony's bass playing and vocals are. And make no mistake, Alex Van Halen is no Neil Peart. He is a solid rock drummer. And since we're talking about Women and Children First, a really great place to start talking about Alex Van Halen's playing is the song Everybody Wants Some. Now, of course, for me, Everybody Wants Some will always indelibly be marked with that scene from Better Off Dead, where Lane Meyer has that funny work-related hallucination with the singing hamburger. I'm always going to have that image caught in my mind. But Alex Van Halen's drumming plays a big role in this piece. The song starts off with this thing called the jungle drums part. It's amazing because this particular drumming part is not super complicated. It sounds more complex than it is. It really, if you're a person who has pretty decent drum chops and have a functionality of how to get around the drum kit, technically it's not hard to play.
And what I mean by having real basic drum set skills to execute this part, there's not really any crazy cross rhythms. There's not like tricky stickings or anything. It's all pretty much straightforward drum set skills. But the way that the rhythms interact with each other on the drum set give it some depth, a depth that really isn't shown if you just look at the parts individually. So for example, the right-handed drum set usually takes care of eighth note subdivisions or something like that on the cymbals. Well, on this one, he just does it on the floor tom. Now, that's pretty simple enough. And then with that, to give it some push, you just give me 4 on the floor on the bass drum. So these things are... Now, the left hand is performing a function that normally is reserved for the snare drum, and it's not a complicated rhythm, but it's just going across 2 or 3 toms. So when you put these things together, Alex Van Halen cites guys like John Bonham and Keith Moon as his influences. But this This particular rhythm, that rhythm that he's playing in the chorus sounds like it's a straight up Ringo beat. The thing that really propels it forward and really gives me that sense of it being attributable to Ringo is how he accents the upbeat of the second beat, the one, da, da.
Now, aside from the drumming part at the beginning of this tune, another really important aspect of this song that I think is worth mentioning as far as Alex Van Halen goes is his snare sound. When I talk to drummers about Alex Van Halen, almost unanimously, they talk about his snare sound. And they're not mistaken. Alex's snare drum is this very deep, sharp attack sound that carries throughout all the Van Halen albums. Even whenever he got a little bit later on in 5150, he was playing electric drums, still that snare drum sound persisted. And it's very interesting because, he played Ludwig drums, and some people attribute to the kind of drum he has. He liked to play this hardwood, rosewood drum. And the heads that he played weren't anything super special. He did have a very specific taping technique that he used with the group, where it was kind of like an A shape that was filled in. So it's quite a bit of tape on the head. Even if you recreate all those things acoustically, you can get very close to the kind of drum sound that Alex Van Halen would get. And with a little EQ, even more so. But it's also just the specific way that he hit the drum, the way that he interacted with the snare drum and the rim, hitting at the same time, the same way every time, created that deep snapping sound that he used, that he got out of that snare drum, and that carried through all the Van Halen albums. Aside from Everybody Wants Some, Women and Children First also boasted a couple of other hits. One of them was a pretty big one, and The Cradle Rock, which is again a kind of a slow burn opening track, not unlike the slow burn opening tracks they've already established almost traditionally that start off Van Halen albums. And they had another minor release called Loss of Control. But for the most part, this album is unfortunately one of the first ones that kind of ended up being an uneven release. Although the songs were produced with then current Van Halen sounds, I think the content harkened back to very early demo recordings for the group. So they don't come across as well developed, I think, as some of their other songs. And I think it's partially because by this point, Van Halen had kind of run through the catalog of songs that they'd written in sort of a live format. They had been out touring for almost 2.5 years at this point, and it's difficult to come up with new material on the road. Those first two albums had a lot of the stuff that they'd already had been playing as a sort of a live local act, and you have the time to develop things. So now that the crunch time has showed up, they have 2 months to come up with an album and then another 10 months to go out and tour. I think by this point, they're starting to run a little bit dry of ideas. So the third track, Fools, all the way down through track 6, which was the tune Loss of Control, one of the releases. I think 3, 4, 5, and 6, all 4 of those tunes are kind of not the best work that Van Halen did with David Lee Roth. That's a little bit forgettable. Now, things start to ramp up a little bit towards the end of the album with the tracks Take Your Whiskey Home, and to a degree, Could This Be Magic? And it's funny because those songs, I think, are more influenced by David Lee Roth's personality than some of the other tracks up to this point. It has that kind of Tin Pan Alley feel that he liked to indulge in so much, and has a vaudevillian undertones that seem to inspire him. But I think the very last track of the album, In a Simple Rhyme, is one of the most advanced things up to that point that Van Halen had done. That song is almost like a Who song. Women and Children First is a little bit uneven, and that unevenness also is a reflection of some of the divisions that were happening in the band. The Van Halen brothers were generally, throughout the entire career of Van Halen, inseparable. But David Lee Roth's personality was becoming more pronounced in the group, and he was doing his best, not really to take over the band as much as he was just trying to put his image as the face of the band. And nothing really sums that up better than the whole mythology that happened between the shooting of the album cover. It was one of the first really big rows in the band, is my understanding. David Lee Roth really wanted to get this guy, Helmut Newton, who was a kind of a high fashion photographer. He'd done work for Playboy and Vanity Fair. He wanted this guy to come and do the photo shoot, and Helmut agreed to come and do it. But as weird things happened, and it ended up starting early, and David Lee Roth kind of did these weird bondage photos before the band even showed up. And that really kind of ticked the rest of the band off. As a matter of fact, there's not many photos that exist available to the public from that photo shoot. But one of them was David Lee Roth chained to a fence. And that was released as a poster inside the first, 1,000 million pressings of the album on record. And then another one of Eddie Van Halen, and he looks none too happy to be taking the picture, even though it's a beautiful picture lighting-wise. His usual smirk is not there. I don't think he was too happy about that. So the photo shoot didn't go as planned, and there was a lot of tension in the group because there was a feeling that David Lee Roth was trying to manage the image of the band in a way that Eddie and Alex didn't approve of. So the record company tried to find a way to make that work out and still end up with an album cover art that would be acceptable. So they hired another photographer named Norman Seeff, and this guy was very well known for doing photography sessions for rock bands, especially rock bands that had internal tensions going on. And he showed up and he played their album hadn't been released yet. He played Women and Children First real loud and passed out whiskey and let the guys just kind of jam out and have fun around the music. And as soon as they started having fun with the music, the photography session happened, and it resulted in some of the most iconic images of Van Halen that were ever made, you know. Kudos to the record company for navigating that properly, but the seeds for what would end up tearing Van Halen apart can be sown to a degree in that interaction for the making of the album cover. So that's all I really want to say about Women and Children First. If you're a Van Halen completist, this is definitely one to get, and it has some very, very high points. But it also has some disappointing points in it that I think would be redeemed later on. But as far as the winning streak of albums that Van Halen had gotten up to this point, this is the first weak link in that chain. But still, you can't argue with the energy and the fun attitude of the album overall. And you have to respect Van Halen's attempts to try something a little bit different for what they had done on the first two albums. Next up will be part 4, and we're going to be looking at Fair Warning. And Fair Warning is one I'm really looking forward to because I've had this album for a while, but to tell you the truth, I've very, very rarely listened to it. And it gets so many great reviews from Van Halen fans. I'm excited about cracking it open and getting a really close look at it. So if you want to know when that's going to happen, please like and subscribe. Share this video out with your friends if you enjoyed it. Get a listen over to me on Spotify. I've got all the music I've been listening to. Representative tracks from 2020 will be over there on my 2020 radio. There'll be a Van Halen track from Women and Children First up there. Until then, I'll catch you guys on the flip side.